Good afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us. We're excited to have you with us for the next hour of this Charting a New Future for Early Childhood Leadership and Equity webcast, where we will unpack lessons and insights from our recently released landscape analysis of early childhood leadership. To help ground us in the two-generation guiding principle of centering and ensuring equity, we'd like to offer a few remarks to acknowledge the history that has brought those of us residing in and around Washington, D.C. to this land. Our Aspen Institute headquarters are located in Washington, D.C., in the Washington, D.C.'s West End neighborhood. D.C. is situated on and adjacent to ancestral lands of the Anacostan, Piscataway, Nanacoke, Pamunkey, and Susquehannock peoples. According to the National Park Service, this region was rich in natural resources and supported the local native people prior to the first documented arrival of Europeans in the 17th century, after which only a quarter of the region's original occupants remained. The swift and sharp decline in indigenous populations was brought on by actions taken by colonizers that included genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal. Today, our indigenous brothers and sisters continue their push for recognition for descendant communities. 11 nations have been recognized by the state of Virginia, 2 by the state of Maryland, and as of January 2018, the Pamunkey, Rappahannock, and Upper Mattaponi tribes have been recognized federally. The American Library Association estimates that roughly 4,000 Native Americans live in present-day Washington, D.C. Communities like the Rappahannock tribe host annual celebrations throughout the region to educate locals on the history and culture of the original inhabitants of this land. On our shared journey to ensure equity in pursuit of justice, we must continue to examine the role our institutions have played in marginalizing indigenous communities. We must also commit to transparently recognizing and celebrating how we all benefit from indigenous wisdom and culture. In that spirit, Ascend is fortunate to partner with indigenous leaders whose experiences and expertise help guide our work, and we invite other partners and all of you to share feedback with us on the work of being anti-racist and the journey toward justice. With that, I would like to introduce Meera Mani. Meera is an inaugural Ascend Fellow and the director of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation's Children, Families, and Communities program, and someone whose ongoing leadership and partnership in this work we remain incredibly grateful. So thank you for being with us, Meera.
Thank you, James, and for that wonderful introduction, and for also really centering us in community. That is such a beautiful way to begin this, and so deeply respectful. And, I want to talk a little bit about why leadership is important to the Packard Foundation. And we believe that leaders really, and good leaders, create sustainable change. They set the vision that sets the tone. They create possibilities and they inspire change. And when we see a good leader, we see that what they're able to do is focus on a mission, look up and out beyond self-interest to create common purpose, build willing and passionate ambassadors and actors that can shift hearts and minds so that we can achieve the important reality. When leaders deeply understand the experiences of who they serve, they create solutions that work. They create an ecosystem of support and inspire people across ranks, sectors, and in communities to serve for greater good. And why now? And why early childhood? Let's just sort of step back and look at some demographic data. We've got 24 million children under the age of 5. 50% of the births in this country are paid for by Medicaid. 1 in 7 children live in hunger. And I really think I could say more, but these three facts tell us that it's really important and critical that we pay attention to young children and their future in the context of the families and communities in which they live. We also can see from the data that zip code matters and that communities of color have fewer services and resources. The pandemic has exacerbated these inequities, reinforcing the need for leaders who have capacities for transformative change, putting equity at the center. And our country is full of talent, people on the front lines doing important work every single day. And providing opportunities and harnessing the talent that we have is really what good leadership is about. We commissioned this report in partnership with the Buffett Early Childhood Fund to respond to this moment, to understand the current state of play, and to create a high-quality, prestigious pathway that centers children and their families with an equity lens. We chose Ascend because, as James said, I am an inaugural fellow, and I have this experience firsthand. And Ascend provides each cohort a time to work together, to create alliances, encourages big thinking, and inspires a collective belief that systems can change to serve the people who rely on them. Ascend embodies the values of humility, audacity, perseverance, and service to create a platform so that we can invest in dynamic leaders willing to examine themselves, their mindsets, to rise above what limits them, to seek new possibilities, work across sectors to really understand the context in which children and families lead their lives, treat those that we work with as partners and peers with respect and humility, and unlock new possibilities by taking the long view for early childhood, by supporting leadership that reflects the communities they serve. Let me turn this over to Ann Mosley now, so you can hear more about all of this from her and our very distinguished panel. So over to you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Meera. Great to be here with you today. And James, also thank you for your opening. I'm delighted to be here with you all today and really have a conversation about what does it look like charting a new future for early childhood leadership through the lens of equity, and really shifting part of our opportunity to think about leadership in a new way. Not only have we learned and seen great movement in the field to broaden that lens and brighten the lens of early childhood to really look at our youngest children from the prenatal to postnatal and the pathway beyond through a whole family lens. This is we are at a generational moment of opportunity. So today we'll share some of the headlines from our report that has been a few years in the making as we went back to listen even more deeply, going through the experiences of COVID, the health and economic impacts of that, a racial and social reckoning and demand for justice, further fueled by the murder of George Floyd and so many others, to look internally and externally to how we double down and transform the pathways and opportunities for our youngest children and their families. So at the heart of this, I think, before I go into 6 headlines that will animate with a conversation, I really want to share from Ascend's perspective, this work and the research is grounded in understanding about why leadership is so important in our quest for systematic opportunity and disrupting the patterns of deeply ingrained oppression that has held back so many children, families, leaders, and in fact, our society, especially Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Hispanic, and Asian American and Pacific Islander. And there's so many other parts to even our identities. I could share more. When we think about what we'll be sharing, the report was informed by the wisdom of 80 diverse leaders from early childhood and family well-being. 20 parent leaders, advisors contributed their ideas, their perspectives, their reviews of the report. We took a look at more than 20 other mission-aligned leadership programs and efforts out there in the field, from long-time established programs to newly created ones. We did that because we believe in generosity and collaboration. No one sector, no one program is going to solve this and march across to the finish line. We believe fully that this is about a new ecosystem, collaborative, collective vision, and activation of what it's going to take to ensure all children, from the very earliest, prenatal to postnatal and beyond, and their families and their communities, are able to truly thrive. The findings are also informed by and build on 10 years of work and privilege of working with extraordinary cross-sector leaders who held the North Star of intergenerational family economic security, educational success, and health and well-being for over the past 10 years through the Ascend Fellowship, and also building on more than 70 years of the Aspen Institute track record. This work is also, when we think about our national network and active in all 50 states and the 100 fellows we have been privileged to work alongside in, their voices we hope you will see throughout this report and their wisdom, because again, it is how we will go forward together and how we will achieve an equitable future. So let me scoot into the 6 headlines that kind of pull up across bodies of the report that really speak to what is required, what is going to be needed for our youngest children and families to thrive and to drive that systematic opportunity lens from practice, policy, narrative, systems. And so when we look at this, I'm going to really center in the first 2. When we think about the call and the requirement and the expectation for all leaders to advance a racial equity commitment and competency. In our research, developing a racial equity competency was ranked number 1. Nearly 75 respondents ranked racial equity as the top competency required for now and for the future. We've seen opportunities and movement to build upon, and we know this work is internal as well as external. It's a value, it's a behavior, it's a competency, and it's the desired outcome. We also know that we need to diversify and accelerate racially diverse leaders in positions of power, influence, decision-making, driving policy, driving funding, driving solutions. When we think about equity, we think about it through the economic, the racial and ethnic and gender lens, and embrace an intersectional approach. We cannot be advancing equity if we are not authentically respecting and including parent and caregiver expertise across policy, practice, systems, and narrative. They are closest, most trusted with families and communities, and they hold wisdom that we need to build into our systems of governance as well as how we do this work. Storytelling, breaking through the noise, bridging polarization. Our leaders need to be confident, grounded, amplified as they build the case, as they cross that polarization, as they inspire our country to invest in the future of all children from the very youngest moment and their families with a lens of equity and a full commitment to their thriving. When we think about the other 3 priorities for what is required for us to achieve the goal of children and families thriving, we know that it's going to require, and if I may ask for the next slide, please, we would know that it's going to require leaders who can think and work collaboratively across systems. This was the 2nd ranked competency from our field research, with more than 70% of leaders ranking this as a top competency. We know that early childhood is not an island into itself. If we are going to ensure our youngest are thriving, we know it's early childhood, it crosses over into health, It's the center of health and human services. It's bridging with labor as we think about pathways and workforce and investments. We know working across systems also is from the public sector to the community to philanthropy. We need to put our children and families at the center and have a young children and young family well-being outcome framework that can guide our policy systems and structures and services. Leaders chart that course. We know creating those conditions for leaders who have been on the front lines of the past few years, dealing with the crushing weight of shots in arms, applying federal funding at rapid rates, but giving them the space for innovation to apply what we know in our learning in real time from research, science, be that behavioral, implementation, brain science, insights from lived experience and expertise, and also really common sense, concrete, what is working in practice, creating those conditions to be able to think about how to change and transform systems in a way that will be sustainable. And lastly, we know we need to redefine the economics of early care and learning in childhood. Workforce is a key priority. And so first I'll hit workforce. If we do not invest in the sector of care right now as a core part of our country that is valued as a workforce, as a pathway, we are not going to get there. And I think the early childhood field has done an extraordinary work, really deepening the commitment to the importance of quality, access, and affordability. This is the time to drive. We need that audacious and adequate funding. And at this time of inequity and inequality, we need to position the future of care, learning, and human development as national commitment number one. This is something when we think about early childhood and we look at what has been traditionally defined as early childhood, we are leaving huge part of the economic pie to the side. We want to be tapping the $1 trillion lever of the public sector of health and human services, thinking about streams, whether it be Medicaid or other public sectors. We want to be looking at the $1 trillion workforce development labor investments that need to be investing in the sector of care. And just recently we saw coming out of the Department of Labor, HHS, and Department of Education, a new registered apprenticeship program specifically looking at quality, wages, the professionalization and pathways for the future of care. This is the kind of innovation that we need. And when we think about the largesse of the health sector and systems, and we think about birth equity and those pathways with doulas, midwives, community health workers, we have an incredible opportunity to define the economics with families and our youngest children at the center. So moving forward, I just want to share a few insights that are lifted up at the end of the report that really, I think, help ground some of and capture some of the ahas we've had in our work. And I want to underscore that as we think about the policy systems change, disruption and transformation moment we're in, we are also in a moment of defining a new chapter in the field and practice and expectations of leadership. This is a new time to who are our leaders? What's our point of view? And how is it grounded in our values of equity, racial equity, economic, gender, and thinking about identity and inclusion, the full experiences we bring. The importance of lived experience, as Meera said, being proximate, connected, and reflective of our communities, and also about generosity. As we think about this work, we know the best ideas will go nowhere if we don't have committed leaders who have the space and the resources and the time to flip that risk equation to a big reward, to focus on that quantum leap. Two pieces in the part of the insights that we'll share that I'll offer before we go into conversation is one, the first one was honor leadership, don't discount that. And this was an important one, especially when we think about the leadership practice, because in the leadership practice space, there's been a lot of conversation about emerging leaders or young leaders. I think we need a whole new term. There is an abundance of leaders who are ready, positioned, and poised with big ideas that our families and our youngest children need. Yet we need to flip the paradigm and the possibilities of power and voice And so thinking about leadership, both in leaders, but then also the organizational and systems change that is needed to make sure, as their voice amplifies, systems and structures and organizations are ready to receive it, to support it, and to act on it. When we think about the importance of going from transformations to tweaking, there's real time. From leaving behind tweaking to transformation. This is a time for audacious aspiration. If we don't name it in this generational moment of time, we will not achieve it. This is a time for bold ideas that are also grounded in a clear sense of purpose. They are pragmatic, and they are also working across sectors and systems and building power across. And so the last part I'll just share, when we think about going from teaching to really these springboards of opportunity and really creating these cross-sector partnerships, trusts, and awareness, it's that sort of, we are behind you 100%, but it's also, I have your back. I have your back in the journey of self and system examination and interrogation. I have your back when you're taking that big leap forward to make an idea go into action. It's how we stand together and how we embrace the challenging times and really lean into what are keeping us up at night, but have the space to then really discover and amplify and activate our leadership and our big ideas. So now it's my pleasure to really, let's go into conversation with an incredible panel of extraordinary leaders who I think really embody what we hope to see be further catalyzed in this report. And so I'll do short introductions and then bring them all onto the screen with me here. First is Rynn Sango. Rynn is a program director for Safe Care Colorado at Family Tree and a longtime parent advisor and partner to Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and was also a parent peer reviewer of the report. I'm also delighted to share and celebrate Rynn has also just earned her BA in social work from Metro Denver College. And so Rynn has, in addition to the work, she's just been recent achievements, longtime associate teacher at Jefferson County Head Start, and also served for multiple years on the Governor of Colorado's Board of Reimagining Child Support. Rynn, it's great to have you here. Second, it's my pleasure to introduce Kristin Bernhard. Kristin Bernhard is an incredible anchor in the field of early childhood. We are privileged that she is a 2018 Ascend Fellow, as well as a new mom. She is a Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Policy at Start Early, formerly the Ounce, Starting Early, where she is working on redefining national policy innovations and also grounding on equity, not only nationally, but also in Illinois. And she has been a champion in the work that happened in Georgia, really through the Department of Early Learning and Care, working with Commissioner Jacobs to really bring a two-generation approach live in Georgia. So it's great to see you, Kristin. And then third is Atiya Weiss. Atiya Weiss we're privileged to have her as the executive director of the Burke Foundation. Atiya is also a 2021 Aspen Institute Ascend Fellow. Atiya is doing extraordinary work through the platform of Philanthropy, where she is really working to address the maternal and child health gap and disparities. And within those strategies, as she's looking at a systematic approach, she's gone very deep in reimagining with community partners, with families, with those, what does the future look like for doulas when we also put that next to birth equity and justice, and thinking about the future of what does the health sector professional pathways look like. So 3 extraordinary leaders, and we'll go right into conversation here. And I think the jump point that I would kind of kick off with is inviting each of the leaders to share, given the need to reimagine early childhood and to really think about that early moment from prenatal to 3, whole family, our youngest children. Rynn, I'll go first to you. You've been a long-term advocate for authentically including parent and caregiver expertise. And I wish, if you could share a little bit of your journey, but also what you have seen be gained, be improved, better outcomes when parent expertise is at the table and part of the policy and systems work. So Rynn, I give the mic to you.
Thank you, Anne. I'm very honored to be a part of the conversation today. EC makes me excited for many reasons. Of course, Anne had said earlier that I was a parent, of course. That's the most important role that I have in my life, working at Jeffco Head Start here in Colorado. I started my journey there just as a parent and really appreciated the environment there, and then decided that I wanted to be a part of it as far as like the work culture. So I became a site aide and worked my way up to being in the classroom. So I have a really, there's a connection there for me, and I learned a lot through just being a parent and also working for Head Start about things that I had not gained as a parent through my own family traditions and values and practices. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. In the work that I currently do, thinking about informing parent voice, and just being a parent and have the opportunity to be an advisor, especially with the Aspen Institute, who I'm very grateful for. I think we get an opportunity to, gain insight and perspective that we normally do not see in some spaces. And it's not that we aren't open to it, but there is an opportunity to gain perspective when we have families at the table, because not all families are the same and not every family has the same value and tradition and goals. We also have opportunities to redistribute power back into the hands of those who should have the power in the first place. I think it's very important when we're talking about racial equity and how to equal the playing field. And sorry, background noise, of course, I didn't think of all of that. One second. And this is usually how we can elicit some feedback from families. And I think too often some of our programs and services are reactive, and we don't need to be. But if we have families at the table, we can be more proactive. I also think we have an opportunity to involve them in the process at the beginning. And I feel like families are more committed and engaged when they're at the center of the conversation from the beginning and have a chance to be a part of the foundation and elicit some feedback throughout it. So this really allows a space for commitment and engagement. And yeah, I feel like it's really helped me as a parent, also as a professional. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rynn. Fantastic. I'm going to go right over to Kristin. And Kristin, both be so curious, building on Rynn's insights about how you're thinking about the importance of like the storytelling and also that cross systems work. What does that, take or look like from your perspective and experience?
Thank you again. Thanks so much for lifting up the important themes of this whole report to the field. I think to start with, I almost feel like we need a reframe of what we consider early childhood expert. I think the ideal place to start would be a recognition that storytellers are early childhood experts. But as we think about the need for our traditional definition of expert to be expanded to include storytellers, to include advocates, I really think about this point where we are in the field now is that we are in the winning hearts game. Because if it was only about winning minds, the ROI data on investments in early childhood and whole family approaches, we've had that for decades now. If it was just about having best-in-class evaluation and research showing improvement in child outcomes and in family outcomes, we've had that for decades. If it was only about winning minds, we would have won by now. And to me, winning looks like a system where every child has access to the early childhood opportunities that allow them to achieve their success. And we know we are so far away from that. So if we're in the winning of minds, advocacy and storytelling has to be baked into how we think about early childhood leadership. And I think like many people on this panel, our journeys throughout our professional careers ebb and flow across different systems and different modalities. And I think when we think about early childhood leaders, in an ideal world, they're multilingual. And not just multilingual in sort of the traditional sense of being able to speak multiple written or spoken languages, but multilingual across systems. So you might be grounded in early childhood learning, maybe childcare, pre-K, Head Start, but hopefully you speak enough Medicaid to understand how those systems could interact better or more seamlessly for families, for professionals, and for the system. I also think the same thing applies to the modalities of sort of policy work, of research work, of systems work, of direct service, that ideally we have leaders who are also multilingual across those modalities. And I know that's definitely been reflected in my own path as I started through state systems work within state government and now sit in an advocacy and policy role. And I think the more we can give leaders exposure to those different modalities, the stronger we have, because we can speak across silos that have traditionally held back families. So I hope as we think about what this report means for the future of early childhood as we move forward, that we're thinking and working collaboratively across systems, and we're thinking and working collaboratively across these modalities of leadership and ways of leading.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And I really want to underscore that point about how we're rejecting and breaking out of the silo framework. And yet there's reasons why they've been constructed and historical real challenges around the inequity and so forth from that. But for leadership's able to lift up, to translate, and to connect and inspire across is so powerful. Easy words to say, much harder to do in the challenging environment. So thank you. Well, now we're going to go to Atiya, who's been really leveraging the power and possibility of philanthropy in exciting ways, and also brings, not only from philanthropy, also brings a corporate sector background. And so really curious for Atiya, for you to share from the report and your experience, what you're thinking about and where you see the future for the economics of developing a care workforce, and what do we need to be considering?
Thanks, Anne. And I just want to really commend you on the report and lifting, sort of doing this silo busting between sectors. So as many of you know, we are in a maternal mortality crisis. Despite all that money that we spend on medical care, the United States has the worst rate of maternal mortality in the developed world. In the state that I work in, that I live in, New Jersey, one of the wealthiest per capita in the country, it actually has some of the worst pregnancy, birth, and infant health outcomes. In our state, Black mothers are 7 times more likely than white mothers to die due to pregnancy-related complications. The US average is something like 2 to 3 times. So we were really moved to act and to do it urgently. And as part of our approach, we did a lot of listening to women of color, and we heard a lot of common themes, not feeling seen or heard by their medical providers, a lot of difficulty obtaining appointments with medical professionals, feeling lost, navigating the health and social services system. Over and over, we found women having to carry the full weight of fighting and advocating for their own care. And so, coming from a place of a lot of humility, we at our foundation don't have all the answers, but by intentionally collaborating with those that are most proximate to the challenges, we can work together to co-design solutions that improve the health of moms and babies and create these kind of ripples of support for families. So you mentioned doulas. A community doula is a trusted person from the community who offers birthing support and sharing knowledge and information. They're often from the same community and they speak the same language or share the same culture as the mother they are serving. They're not clinicians, but they are highly effective at supporting and helping women give birth. And I could say too, I could just attest to how much they've been lifelines, during the pandemic. But so right now, in our state, we have something like 120 community doulas. We simply do not have enough of this amazing talent pool to meet the demand. But at the same time, talking about economics, we want to really think very carefully about expanding the community doula workforce to really think about compensation and thriving wages. So right now, while many states are implementing Medicaid reimbursement, it's generally too low to support just compensation. And we don't want to perpetuate, yet another system that's comprised of women of color that are underpaid and undervalued. So what we're thinking about in terms of expanding the doula workforce is really building a group of co-designers, of doulas, where they can identify the challenges and the solutions and help us design the workforces they would like to have. And then, we can help connect the dots with other system leaders, hospitals, providers, insurance system, community organizations, really working collaboratively together. And And based on how the doulas guide us with their wisdom, we're going to launch several workforce training initiatives to really shore up the models that the community doulas wish to see. And we've already heard right now they're very interested in having funding, beyond Medicaid to have economic security. They're very interested in education credits for doula training, for lived experience and career pathway support, and more mental health support. So we're very much looking forward to working together to build a more equitable and thriving perinatal workforce.
Atiya, thank you so much. And as we're kind of going to go to another question, and there's so much here, one of the parts where I'm going to really invite each of the speakers to share and leaders to share a bit about where you see either the greatest challenge or the greatest opportunity when we're talking about charting a new future for our youngest children and their families, and really redefining kind of how we've thought and done early childhood. And if you put equity at the center of that, and thinking about equity from equity of power, identity, race, ethnicity, and again, intersectionality, I'd love to hear, and also that power of lived experience. What's the greatest challenge and opportunity? And if I could go to you, Kristin, for your thoughts, where you've really been, you've also been on the journey with us and Ascend Fellows, as we all are on the journey. Love to hear your thoughts, sort of maybe from a leadership perspective, but also kind of out for the future.
Thank you, Anne. When I think about the challenge, I think something that's already been talked about in this panel is just the vast diversity of the field of early childhood. At Start Early, like many of the other organizations on this panel today, we think about the prenatal to age 5 system. And so for us, that includes all the support services and programs that families and children need to thrive in those earliest years. And when I think about the diversity of the field of leadership across doulas, home visitors, prenatal health providers, when I think about what all of our different systems of early learning, whether it's childcare, pre-K, Head Start, home, family, friend, and neighbor care, what those look like, just the vast diversity of the field of leadership in and of itself. And then thinking about a shared North Star around racial equity and how do we embed that across all of those different buckets of the field of early childhood. So I see that as a huge challenge for us. But I think, as we've already talked about, there's such beauty in the diversity of this space that I hope we can lean into that as we think about how to apply it. And then I was just thinking about Meera's opening comments about this moment of transformative change, that when you have effective leadership, we can really see transformative change. And I think when I think about the benefit of being able to accomplish this, what could that look like? It's the ability to potentially actually achieve that for children and families.
Yeah, thank you, Kristin. And, kind of channeling Meera from transaction to transformation, and really that trust at the center. And Rynn, I'd love to hear from you as you think about your journey and being at the table, being in positions of leadership, kind of those pathways that you've broken through and achieved. What is your vision and hopes, maybe greatest challenge or also just opportunity for the field to know about when we think about embracing and activating and deepening across the board of racial equity commitment, as well as advancing, further leaders like you on up to maybe future governor yourself?
Thanks, Anne, future governor. I think for me to think about my personal journey, I think one of the biggest challenges was providing opportunities and spaces for individuals to move forward who don't normally have those credentials, but do have the passion and want to be a part of the field and work with the families. I was not qualified to be a bus aide or to be a teacher when I was a bus aide. So providing, some funding and some flexibility in that, like the apprenticeship program that you were mentioning earlier, and the benefit is just to increase creative juices, right? And to support and encourage authenticity in not only just our leadership cultures, but also our classrooms. Children will have more representation and maybe even some exposure to different diversities and conversations. I think it also could increase understanding of variety of cultural practices. Teachers understand families' cultural norms and what's important to them and their values. when they are also from that community. So it's easier to have conversations and serve in a different capacity when you have that lived experience. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Rynn. And Atiya, how about you? Both.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I think at the heart of it, as a society, we really haven't valued the earliest years. We haven't valued caregiving. And systemic racism has contributed to poor compensation, a lack of career pathways, and ultimately a lower quality of system of care for our children. So I think our system leaders, our policymakers, they really need to ask themselves why people of color or people with different backgrounds aren't fairly compensated, advancing, or helping influence the decision making. But what this report points out is that if we make a priority to elevate what educators and parents want, we can really reimagine the system of care. And I was really struck by something that Representative Ayanna Presley recently said, which was the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. So if we really listen to parents and educators, we would be paying thriving wages and having, affordable childcare for families.
Oh my God, that's a very powerful quote about those closest to the pain need to be holding the most important power. And I want to connect this to my last question here. When we think about what it takes to kind of create those conditions that allow, for the Ascend Fellowship to have the Socratic experience, to literally live an examined life, to question ourselves internally, but interrogate the systems and structures we all live in. And, one of the things that when we talk about honoring and creating those conditions for leadership and knowing the weight and exhaustion that has impacted the field of those working closely with children and families at their youngest years, those critical years, and knowing how inequitable at times that weight has been, especially for leaders of color. I'm curious, Rynn, any insights you want to share from what does that really look like from your leadership, even your pathway from post-secondary to your BA while mothering a full family and children? What insights you have around what are those condition breakthroughs that we need to really make sure we don't miss, or insights you have?
Yeah, I feel so layered, but yes, definitely. I think I had mentioned it earlier. I never realized what a high value authenticity was for me. And I felt like, being a woman of color and trying to be in positions of power, I had to put that to the side to try to move in different spaces. So I think we have an opportunity to allow cultures where people can be authentic in who they are and bring those to the spaces. And in my journey, I think one of the best things that I had was opportunities of multiple support and people to tap into, especially not having a role model or anybody to try to guide me. It was really helpful to have the Aspen Institute or being a part of some other programs or having a head start that I can lean on to kind of help guide me for those questions that I just never had answers to at growing up and in the spaces that I was in.
Yeah. Thanks, Rynn. And I remember so well when it was years ago, we were at a policy forum and you opened up on the future of early childhood and health with the special advisor to then President Obama about who was leading the economic mobility work. And you put forward our stories, like we are people, we are not statistics. This is our strength, our resilience. And when he left that conference with many esteemed leaders, he said the most important influential leader and voice he heard from was you. Just one example about the many ways of reimagining the conversations, the table, the power, and where the answers come from. Kristin, you have been working at the state level and the national level, both really in the work of reimagining and recreating and defining systems, and know what frontline leaders have been working with. And I'm curious about when you think about how do we hold this both great time of disruption and opportunity for transformation? Where are people with energy and exhaustion, and what kind of conditions do they need? And when do we space for out of the box thinking, like quantum leap ideas. I've sort of given you a big kind of platform to jump off of, but I'm curious if to pull out your experience from those frontline sort of state and local insights to, for the future of leadership.
Thanks for that question, Anne. I'm going to channel especially the state leaders that I'm in contact with, including some of whom I know are on this event today. When I talk with them, who are really the ones implementing some of the transformative investment we've had at the federal level, for example, when I talk with them, I hear so much tiredness in their voice and the best of intent to do the right thing for children and families, but honestly, sometimes sheer exhaustion in the moment of just the overwhelming pace of change and opportunity. And it's so hard to keep up with. And I hear that even down to the community level when I think about the individual schools and programs that I hear from, just so much tiredness in this moment. And when I think about what that means for leaders in these contexts in particular, I have been so fortunate to work for so many fantastic leaders. And thinking about how we keep that why at the center, we often joke about bringing the baby in the room and how we can do that. I think in moments like this, about where we have just this unprecedented opportunity, but also an unprecedented amount of work to go with it, how are we finding those moments to recenter around the why? And how are we creating the time for the people we lead, the teams we lead, the communities we're in partnership with, to create the time to remind ourselves about the why? And I think that sounds maybe even a little silly or basic in this moment, but I just think it's so critically important in this time where everyone is just so overwhelmed, especially as we're coming out of maybe pandemic into endemic and grappling with what does the new normal look like in this moment. Just how do we create, as leaders, create the time and space for people to reflect on their why and bring the baby into the room, whatever that looks like in your context in the field.
Oh, Kristin, really powerful. And, Atiya, I'm curious, we're both, when we think about having the adequate funding and also the authentic collaboration and partnerships, be it with like public sector funding, but taking a moment to really look at the power of philanthropy. And we'll also hopefully hear a little bit from Meera on her vision around that in a minute. But Atiya, what have been some of your insights when you've thought about kind of the future of the earliest years and children and whole families and equity? Like, what have been some shifts and really important innovations you've seen in how philanthropy can also really create those conditions, start doing or stop doing even sometimes?
Yeah, I think in some ways, the pandemic revealed a lot about how I think outdated the philanthropic sector is, that, so many foundations redid their forms, their application processes. They were much more focused on general ops support than program support. So really a lot of good changes came, I think, for the sector in the pandemic. And I think it's been a real opportunity to look at what's been working, not working. And I think there's been a real deep recognition that the status quo isn't working. It isn't just like, let's find our evidence-based program and plug it into a state and then scale it. I think there's a lot more desire to get much deeper into community and working in direct partnership together. So I think that's been kind of a sort of an exciting trend in the philanthropic sector in terms of seizing this moment and really thinking differently about how we give and looking at much more building the capacity and the leadership long term in community. So I think there's a lot of sort of resonance around that when I talk to my peers and other funders. And I'm really wanted to just build on kind of what Rynn was saying about leadership. I think leadership is such a special area in our society, and it feels reserved for CEOs or like a certain class of people. And as Americans, we just love to hold up these individual leaders, and they often look, in a certain way. I just think we'd be in such a different place if we invested in the leadership of frontline early childhood educators, in nurses, in doulas as leaders. And I think about what the Ascend Fellowship has given to me, and what if we offered that time to reflect and dream, the peer support, coaching, exposure to systems thinking, new connections, new resources, and give that to those that are really directly involved in serving, their families. I think we'd have a mind-boggling new and better society.
Thank you, Atiya. Super powerful. at the danger of pulling out one quote, because there's beautiful quotes throughout this report, but it's going to kind of, for a quick closeout here, I'm bringing Meera up in a second. There's a quote from Sherry Killen Stewart, who I think is a real giant, has been a mentor and a source of inspiration for me when I think about the future of early childhood and equity, and doing the incredible work she's been doing with Build, and also thinking deeply about leadership. She said, as an early childhood leader and really field anchor, she said, we need to focus on the economic stability of each and every family through whole family approaches versus siloed programmatic strategies. And I'm curious, Rynn, I'll start with you, but just kind of a quick 1, 2, 3 from each of you. When you think about early childhood learning, care, pathways, but the impact of poverty, of economic instability, of not parents and caregivers as teachers, but their pathways in the economic stability. I'm just, Rynn, if there's anything that you would share from your perspective, why whole family or 2-gen, but making sure that economic mobility factor is part of this future of early childhood and equity.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I think that's a really good question, because just thinking about the 2-gen approach, the multi-gen approach, right? Because we could be serving grandparents and uncles. I think it's just super important that we have to think about all of our basic needs. Families can't function, you can't think about the future if you can't put dinner on the table. So that's why I feel like the 2-gen approach, multi-gen approach, along with collaboration from community partnerships, is really important. So when we think about just that whole family, I think we should also be thinking about community partners and organizations, how we all come together to wrap services around those families. So that way they can focus and we can partner with them. Because when you're in crisis mode, and you're thinking about tomorrow. And sometimes we want to provide resources to people and allow them to think about the future. But you cannot if you can't, live in today and be able to thrive. So I think that's why it's super important to think about how we collaborate as community partners to make sure that families are getting those wraparound services, because it's not just one of our jobs. It's all of our jobs.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. And Kristin and Atiya, I don't know if you have one sentence that would speak to why whole family or 2-gen. Kristin, do your narrator essence point.
Because it's what families are telling us they want and need first. Every time we survey families, parents, teachers in our early learning programs, they identify this as the number one policy area they want to work on. And so we have to start there and listen to what they are telling us they want and need to be successful.
Beautiful. Thank you. Atiya?
Yeah, just agreeing with my panelists, really need to think about taking stress off of families and giving them economic stability. And we already have great policies that we need to implement, across the board: paid leave, comprehensive health care, and affordable childcare. All of those will make a huge difference for lifelong health and well-being for our children.
Thank you so much. The powerful conversation and powerful leadership in action that are actually embodying the future. So I'd love to bring Meera up, as we just have a little bit left, and we'll share some commitments and path forward in a moment. But I really want to bring Meera's voice who set us started us so well. What are your reflections, and most importantly, sort of maybe your call to charge as we think about the opportunity ahead?
Well, Anne, wow, what a panel, right? Hard to follow such wisdom and authenticity. So thank you to all three of them. I think that this is a challenge that we are ready for in this country. We have to embrace diversity in all forms of people, of systems, of contexts. But what in that can bind us together? The answer to that, for me, is a unifying North Star. So if we can come together across all of our intersectionality and diversity and say, here's what we imagine for children and families in this country. Now let's look at where we sit in this puzzle and how we need to change, alter, what it means to share power, what it means to to center voice and equity. And I think in those processes, my experience has been you create demand for the change you want to see. And until you create that demand, the systems are not going to respond. So the role of philanthropy for me is really catalyzing that kind of change in the way that we can. And that's where some of your research and innovation and really trying some new things and storytelling, all these things really play a powerful role. But we cannot forget the systems that have been set up. And we need to partner and play with them as well. Because there are actors within systems who want to do right. And I think we need to really have them be part of the solution as well. So I thank Ascend for stepping into this, and the panelists again, Kristin, Atiya, and Rynn. I met Rynn for the first time today. I just think that this has been such an amazing discussion. I was captivated, and thank you so much for being on this journey with us. And James, thanks for an absolutely beautiful beginning to this session.
Thank you, Meera, and thank you for being a full partner and modeling and inspiring us all, both in how we individually embody the change and help build the demand for the change we want to seek and achieve. And I think the part that I'll just close with, and we'll just share a few next step commitments publicly that Ascend is working on ourselves, but also with others. But I want to keep underscoring the point that our systems are made up and comprised of people. Who's included, who's not, is a very important aspect of this. Our systems are changeable. We can have intentional control and driving for the future that we want. Leaders also set, drive, implement policy, both the what and the how. And so as we're talking about growing power, building power, challenging old power structures, for Ascend at the Aspen Institute, building on our 10 years and the track record and the privileged platform of the Aspen Institute to support diverse leaders with these kind of values and dreams, we are deepening, expanding our pipeline of leaders with annual launch of cohorts. We are doubling down. We're continuing to build on the Socratic and the somatic practice, recognizing the whole life leader experience body in this work. It needs to be both and, so that big can pursue the quantum leap with that North Star you've heard collectively, intergenerational family mobility, and brightening and tightening that lens on our youngest children and our youngest families from prenatal to 3 and beyond. And so you'll see more of that. We also will be launching an Aspen Leadership Collaborative. As I said early, the greatest, we don't see ourselves as the one and only. There are many important mission-aligned efforts. This is an opportunity for us to learn, grow, deepen, scale, and build radical collaboration that also builds power and a network of thousands of leaders who are actively changing the world. We'll leverage the heck out of the Aspen Institute platform in fun and creative ways, and working with partners in philanthropy and maybe even the public sector. We want to inspire transformational investments in leadership. This is not project funding. This is multi-year funding. We are laying out the vision through 2030 and beyond, because it is the leaders that are going to drive the change that our world so desperately is calling for. And so having the opportunity, along with Lori Severance, James White, Marjorie Sims, and many colleagues here at the Aspen Institute, we are on the drumbeat to partnering and working alongside with our partners and our fellows and our leaders. And stay tuned for later this month at the Ideas Festival for a follow-up conversation with more Ascend Fellows who are embodying the change that we need. This is about the leaders for our times. They are abundant, they are ready, they are making it happen, and they have the solutions for our future. We need to make sure our podiums, policies, powers, and structures have their vision, their ideas, their voice at the center. And so this will be something to be live streamed out, an incredible panel that has everything from on-the-ground innovators, from Aisha Nyandoro down in Springboard to Opportunities, down in Jackson, Mississippi, to Melanie Bridgeforth, who is also down at the Women's Foundation of Alabama from the southeast of our country, looking at racial equity, guaranteed income, childcare, workforce. Lori Pfingst, who will be leading out on what does it mean to redefine state systems grounded in equity, lived experience, and opportunity. And of course, elected leaders like Melvin Carter, who are making it happen in ground zero of St. Paul, Minnesota, from the heart of our country, to think reimagining for all children and families being able to succeed. And Katie Albright, from child welfare to truly well-being. So stay tuned, more inspiration, more work coming out of Ascend at the Aspen Institute in partnership and in collaboration with each of you. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Share your ideas, share your breakthroughs, share your questions and your ideas for what you want to do, how you might like to partner to chart a new future for early childhood leadership and equity, and ensure from the very youngest years we're getting it right. Thanks so much.